It's been a year since it happened. The worst part wasn't the humiliation. It wasn't the jokes or the laughter. The worst part was what they were hiding. The worst part was the silence that came before it. I'm Monica. I'm 40 years old. For most of my life, I thought I was part of a family, a real one. Now I know I was just an audience member. And sometimes I was the show. I've always been the quiet one, the one who doesn't make waves. My family is loud. They're all about tradition, about how things look from the outside. There's a clear hierarchy. You know who's on top and who's at the bottom. I was always somewhere near the bottom. It wasn't because I was unsuccessful. I have a good career. I'm financially independent. I own my own place. In my family, that was the problem. My independence was seen as a failure to need them, a failure to follow the path. Their path was marriage, kids, and staying close. My path was just mine. And they couldn't stand that. Humor was the weapon of choice in my family. A joke could carry a criticism right to your face, and if you reacted, you were the one with the problem. You were too sensitive. You couldn't take a joke. You were ruining the mood. So for years, I just learned to take it. I'd smile, I'd nod. I'd let the comment pass. It was the price of admission, the cost of belonging. I remember one Christmas a few years ago. My cousin David brought his new wife. Everyone was celebrating them. My Aunt Sarah, the unofficial matriarch of the family, turned to me. She made an announcement to the room. She said she was so glad Monica was there because they needed someone to watch the kids while the adults had fun. The room laughed. It was a joke, of course. But I wasn't laughing. I was just standing there, feeling small. My mother saw my face. Later, she told me that Aunt Sarah meant well, that it was her way of trying to include me. I didn't understand how being designated the default babysitter was a form of inclusion. But I didn't argue. I never did. Another time, at a summer barbecue, my uncle asked me about my car. He thought it was too practical, too boring for a single woman. He suggested I should have something more exciting, something to attract a man. He said it in front of everyone. And again, they all chuckled. My car was paid off. It was reliable. It was exactly what I needed. But in their eyes, it was a symbol of my failure, a failure to be the right kind of woman. I just smiled and said nothing. Peace was more important than being right. That's what I told myself anyway. I always tried to keep the peace. I would show up for every event. I would bring a nice gift. I would ask everyone about their lives. I performed the role of the dutiful daughter, the nice niece, the quiet cousin. I thought that was enough. I thought my silence would be mistaken for contentment. I was wrong. My silence was seen as an empty space they could fill with their own narratives. Their story about me was that I was lonely, that I was secretly miserable, that my independence was a front for a life of quiet desperation. It didn't matter that it wasn't true. It was the story they all agreed on. It made them feel better about their own choices. It made them feel like they had won something. I realize now that they were always preparing. Every little jab, every backhanded compliment, every "it's just a joke" moment was a rehearsal. They were practicing. They were getting ready for the main event. And I just kept showing up, thinking that one day they would finally see me for who I was. I was naive. So incredibly naive. The celebration was for my grandparents, their big anniversary. It was supposed to be a day about love and family and togetherness. That's what the invitation said anyway. My mother called me a week before the party. She sounded nervous. She told me it was important for everyone to be on their best behavior. She said she wanted the day to be perfect for her parents. Then she paused. She told me to please not be so sensitive if someone made a joke. That was the first real warning. I felt a knot in my stomach. I knew what she was really asking. She was asking me to be ready to be their target. She was asking me to absorb whatever they threw at me so her day could be perfect. I almost said no. I almost told her I wasn't coming. But then I felt the familiar guilt, the fear of being the one who causes trouble. So I agreed. I told her I would be there. I told her I would be fine. I was a fool. The day of the party, I felt a sense of dread. I sat in my car for a few minutes before going in. I told myself it was just a few hours. I could handle it. I had handled it 100 times before. But something felt different this time. The air was thicker with it. I walked in, and the conversation stopped for a second. Every eye was on me. It wasn't a warm welcome. It was an inspection. Aunt Sarah was the first to approach. She gave me a hug that felt like a cage. She held me by the shoulders and looked me up and down. Her first comment was about my being there alone. She said it loudly, for the benefit of those nearby. She expressed her fake sympathy that I couldn't find a date. It was the opening shot, and it landed exactly as intended. A few people tittered. My Uncle Mike smirked. I just smiled my practiced, empty smile. I told her I was happy to be there. I gave my grandparents their gift. I tried to blend in. I tried to find a quiet corner. But they wouldn't let me. My cousin, David's brother, came over next. He asked me about my job. He framed it as a joke. He asked if I ever got tired of telling other people what to do all day. He made it sound like my management position was just me being bossy. He said it probably explained why I was still single. More laughter, a little louder this time. I felt my face get hot. I wanted to disappear. I looked for my mother. She was on the other side of the room talking to my grandmother. She was pretending not to hear. That was her specialty. Selective deafness. I excused myself and went to get a drink of water. I thought if I kept moving, they couldn't pin me down. But the house wasn't that big. There was nowhere to hide. Uncle Mike cornered me near the kitchen. He started talking about finances. He mentioned how expensive it was to raise a family. Then he looked at me with a pitying expression. He said at least I didn't have to worry about that. I could spend all my money on myself. It was meant to sound like a compliment, but it was an accusation. An accusation of selfishness, of having an easy life. I knew his son, my cousin David, was having financial trouble. The whole family knew. So the comment wasn't just about me. It was a setup. It was laying the groundwork for something. I didn't know what it was yet, but I felt it. I felt like a chess piece being moved into a vulnerable position. The jokes kept coming, one after another. My aunt commented on the fact that I hadn't had children. She said the clock was ticking. Loudly. My cousin's wife made a remark about how much free time I must have. She said she wished she had time to read books and go to the gym. Every comment was designed to highlight my otherness. My life, which was different from theirs, was presented as a collection of deficiencies. I wasn't a person. I was a checklist of things they had and I didn't. Husband, check. Kids, check. Mortgage for a big family house, check. I had failed their test, and this was my punishment. The worst part was the performance of it all. They'd deliver the line, then look around the room to see who was laughing. It was a show for an audience, and the audience was each other. They were all in on it. They were all participating. Even the ones who said nothing were complicit. Their silence was a form of applause. I felt a strange sense of detachment begin to settle in. It was like I was floating above my own body, watching this happen to someone else. The initial sting of shame was fading. It was being replaced by a cold, hard curiosity. Why were they doing this? Why today? Why with such coordination? It wasn't just casual family cruelty. This was organized. This was a strategy. Then came the toasts. Everyone gathered in the main room. My grandfather said a few words. My grandmother cried a little. It was a genuinely sweet moment. For a minute, I thought the attacks were over. Then my Uncle Mike stood up to give his toast. He started by talking about family, about legacy, about sticking together. Then he turned his body and his attention directly to me. He said that in every family there are different paths. He talked about the path of sacrifice, the one his son David had taken, with a wife and children. And then he talked about my path, the path of independence. He didn't use the word independence as a good thing. He used it like a disease. He talked about my career. He used air quotes. He talked about my freedom. He said it with a sneer. He told a story about me from when I was a teenager, a story I'd forgotten, a story where I had been stubborn about something. He twisted it into a lifelong character flaw, a pattern of selfishness. He ended his toast by raising his glass. He told everyone to drink to Monica, who taught them all that the most important person in your life is yourself. The room was quiet for a second, and then they laughed. It wasn't small chuckles this time. It was a wave of loud, open laughter. They were laughing at me, all of them, my family. I looked at my mother. She was staring at her glass. She wouldn't look at me. I looked at my father. He was smiling a weak, uncomfortable smile. He was a coward. He always had been. I looked at my grandparents, the guests of honor. They looked confused, but they were smiling too, following the lead of the room. I was completely, utterly alone. In that moment, something inside me broke, but it wasn't the part that felt shame. That part was already numb. The part that broke was the part that had always tried, the part that had always hoped, the part that believed in the idea of family. I realized I wasn't at a celebration. I was at my own public execution, my social execution. And the worst part wasn't the pain, it was the clarity. I saw them all for exactly who they were, not as my family, but as a group of people with a shared agenda. And I was in their way. I stood up. I didn't say a word. I didn't cry. I didn't cause a scene. My face was a complete blank. I felt nothing. I walked out of the room. I could feel their eyes on my back. The laughter had stopped. Now there was just a confused, tense silence. I walked down the hall, got my coat, and opened the front door. As I was leaving, I heard my Aunt Sarah's voice. She said something about me being dramatic, about ruining the party. I closed the door behind me and didn't look back. The drive home was silent. I didn't turn on the radio. I just drove. I felt like a machine. When I got to my apartment, I locked the door. I sat on my sofa. I didn't move for a very long time. I was waiting for the anger or the sadness to hit me, but it never came. There was just a profound, deafening emptiness, a void where my family used to be. The next day, my phone was silent. No calls, no texts, no one checking to see if I was okay, no one apologizing. It was confirmation. This was what they wanted. They had pushed me out. Late in the afternoon, my mother called. I answered. I don't know why. She wasn't calling to apologize. She was calling to scold me. She told me I had embarrassed her. She said my grandparents were upset, that I had ruined the end of their special day by walking out. She told me Aunt Sarah and Uncle Mike were furious. I listened to her without saying anything. Her words didn't even register as hurtful anymore. They were just information. She kept talking. She said I needed to be the one to apologize. I needed to call Aunt Sarah and smooth things over. I needed to understand that they were just joking and that my reaction was completely out of proportion. When she finally ran out of things to say, there was a long silence. She was waiting for me to agree, for me to fold like I always did. I just said one thing. I told her I understood. Then I hung up the phone. I understood, but not in the way she thought. I understood that the cruelty was the point. The humiliation was a tool, but I still didn't know what it was for. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept replaying the jokes in my head. The comment about my money, my uncle's pitying a look, the mention of David's financial problems, the toast about my selfishness. It was all connected. It wasn't random. It was a story they were telling, a story for public consumption. The story was that Monica is selfish. Monica only cares about herself. Monica has an easy life and doesn't understand sacrifice. Why did they need to tell that story? That was the question that kept me awake. The next morning, I started looking for answers. I didn't know what I was looking for exactly. I just had a feeling that this was about something tangible, something more than just family dynamics. I thought about the one thing that connected us all in a legal, financial way. My grandparents' house. Not the house they lived in now, their original family home. The house my mother grew up in. It was in a trust. And after my grandmother's sister passed away a few years ago, I had been living there. The agreement was informal. I paid for the maintenance, the taxes, the utilities. I kept the place from falling apart. The understanding, the one my grandfather had explained to me years ago, was that the house would be mine one day. It was my reward for being the one who stayed, the one who never asked for anything. I suddenly felt a cold dread that was different from the shame I'd felt at the party. This was a practical fear. I went to my computer. I looked up the county property records online. I typed in the address of the house, and there it was. A pending sale agreement filed 2 weeks ago. The sellers were listed as the trustees. My Aunt Sarah and my Uncle Mike. My breath caught in my chest. They were selling it. They were selling the house I lived in, the house I had poured my own money into, the house that was supposed to be mine, and they had done it behind my back. Suddenly, everything made perfect sense. The party wasn't just a party. It was a preemptive strike. They knew this news would eventually come out. They knew I would be devastated and angry. They needed to discredit me before I had a chance to speak. They needed to paint me as the villain of the story first. If I was selfish, then I didn't deserve the house. If I was unstable and overly sensitive, then my reaction to the news would be dismissed as just more of Monica's drama. If I only cared about myself, then taking the house from me wasn't an injustice. It was a rebalancing of the scales. The humiliation wasn't about hurting me. It was about controlling the narrative. It was a public relations campaign. And the worst part, the absolute worst part, was that my mother knew. Her phone call telling me to be less sensitive, her silence during the party, her anger at me for leaving. She wasn't just a bystander. She was part of it. She had agreed to it. She had sacrificed me to keep the peace with her siblings. The emptiness I had been feeling started to fill up. But it wasn't with anger or sadness. It was with a cold, hard resolve. They thought they had already won. They thought their little show had worked. They underestimated me. They had always underestimated me. I went to my files and found the paperwork for the trust. My grandfather had given me a copy years ago. He had told me to keep it safe. He had told me to read it carefully if there was ever any trouble. I had never read it. I had trusted them. I sat down and read every single word. It was dense and full of legal language, but I took my time. And then I found it, a single clause buried deep in the document. It stated that any sale of the property required the unanimous written consent of all the named beneficiaries. I was a named beneficiary. They had not asked for my consent. They had not even told me. The sale was illegal. I looked at the signature page on the trust document, my grandfather's signature, and I felt a surge of something I hadn't felt in a long time. It was love, a protective love from a man who was long gone. He had known. He had known what his children were capable of. He had left me a shield, and I was finally going to use it. The next day, I called a lawyer. I didn't tell him the whole story about the party. I didn't talk about my feelings. I was all business. I explained the situation with the trust, the property, and the pending sale. I showed him the clause. He confirmed what I already knew. The sale was invalid without my signature. He asked me what I wanted to do. For the first time in my life, I didn't hesitate. I didn't wonder what would keep the peace. I knew exactly what I wanted to do. I wanted to stop them. My lawyer drafted a letter. It was sent to my aunt, my uncle, and the real estate agency handling the sale. It was a formal cease and desist. It laid out the terms of the trust and my legal position. It informed them that the sale was void and that any further action would be met with legal consequences. I didn't make a phone call. I didn't send a text. I let the letter speak for me. For 2 days, there was silence, a different kind of silence, a heavy, shocked silence. Then the storm broke. My phone started ringing. It was my Aunt Sarah. I didn't answer. She left a voicemail. I listened to it later. It was a torrent of rage. She called me ungrateful. She called me selfish. She said I was destroying the family. She said David needed that money. His family needed it. She asked me what was wrong with me. Then my Uncle Mike called. I didn't answer. His voicemail was more of the same. He accused me of trying to hurt them. He said I had no idea what I was doing. Then my mother. I answered her call. I wanted to hear what she would say. Her voice was shaking. But it wasn't with sadness, it was with fury. She asked me how I could do this to them, to my own family. She told me I had gone too far, that I was being vindictive. I listened patiently. When she was done, I asked her a single question. I asked her when they were going to tell me they were selling the house. She didn't have an answer. I asked her if the plan was to let me find out when the new owners showed up at the door. Silence. I asked her if she thought the jokes at the party were fair. She started to say that I was taking it all the wrong way. I cut her off. I told her I knew why they did it. I told her I understood the strategy, and I told her it was over. I told her not to call me again. Then I hung up. The next few weeks were a blur of legal maneuvering. They tried to fight it. They tried to pressure me. They sent other family members to try to talk to me. Cousins, distant relatives. They were all messengers carrying the same story. Monica is being difficult. Monica is being selfish. But the words had no power over me anymore. They were just noise. I understood that their definition of family was a group of people who were allowed to make decisions about my life without my consent. Their definition of love was my silent compliance. I refused to comply. The war began with a vibration. My phone, lying face down on my desk, buzzed against the dark wood. It was a low, angry hum, the sound of a trapped hornet. Then it stopped. A moment of silence. Then it buzzed again. I didn't need to look. I knew the rhythm. A call from Aunt Sarah, hanging up in a huff. A text from my mother, full of frantic punctuation. A missed call from a cousin I hadn't spoken to in a year. This was the sound of their fury. For the first hour, I let it happen. I made coffee. I watched the steam rise and curl into the quiet air of my apartment. Each buzz from the desk was an echo from a world I was no longer in. It was distant. It was someone else's problem. My apartment, which had once felt like a symbol of my isolation, was now a fortress. The cease and desist letter was the wall. My silence was the moat. I finally walked over to the desk. I turned the phone over. The screen was a wall of notifications, a solid block of vitriol. Aunt Sarah, you have destroyed this family. After everything we have done for you, your grandfather would be ashamed. Uncle Mike, call me immediately. You have made a grave error. My mother, Monica, please call me. You don't understand what you've done. Sarah is having chest pains. You're going to give her a heart attack. This isn't about a house, it's about family. They were just words on a screen, pixels arranged to look like threats and guilt. It was amazing how little it weighed. Before, a single text like that would have sent a spike of acid into my stomach. It would have felt like a summons, a command to appear and apologize for a crime I didn't understand. Now I saw the strategy. Aunt Sarah's text wasn't about shame. It was an appeal to a ghost, an attempt to weaponize the memory of the one man who had tried to protect me. Uncle Mike's wasn't a warning, it was a bluff. He was a poker player who had just been called, and he was trying to scare me into folding a winning hand. Grave error. The only error was getting caught. And my mother's text, that was the masterpiece. It was never about me. It was about Sarah's chest pains. It was about the disruption to her sister's life. I wasn't a daughter who had been betrayed. I was a natural disaster that had inconveniently struck her family. This isn't about a house. She was right. It wasn't about the house. It was about the years of humiliation that had been the down payment for it. I deleted the messages, all of them. I cleared the notifications. The screen went dark and quiet. It felt like wiping a dirty window clean. My lawyer's name was Arthur Davies. He was in his late 60s, with a voice that sounded like gravel being slowly raked over velvet. He had been recommended by a colleague, described as a man who does not get rattled. He had called me that morning, just before the barrage began. The letter was delivered by courier to your uncle's office and emailed to the realtor an hour ago, Monica, he'd said. His tone was matter-of-fact, as if discussing the weather. The preliminary title search confirms the trust's ownership and the clause you identified. They can't sell, not without your signature. What will they do now? I had asked. My voice was steady. It was a new feeling. Well, he'd said, and I could hear a dry smile in his voice. First, they will be very, very angry. They will likely try to contact you. They will threaten, they will bargain, they will try to guilt you. My advice is to not engage at all. Let them send their angry emails into the void. The void, I like that. My silence wasn't empty. It was a destination. Let them tire themselves out, he continued. Then their lawyer will likely contact me. We'll see what their opening position is. But legally, Monica, their position is non-existent. The sale was illegal. They know it. Now you know it. That's the end of the story. I was wrong. It wasn't the end of the story. It was the end of the lie. The calls and texts slowed by evening. The initial shockwave of their rage had passed. Now came the targeted ordnance. An email appeared in my inbox. The sender was my mother. The subject line was simply, "Your family." I opened it. It was long. A wall of text typed out on an iPhone, full of typos and misplaced emotion. It was a guided tour of my mother's mind. She started with my childhood, how my aunts and uncles had always been there for me, how Aunt Sarah bought me my first bicycle, how Uncle Mike took me to a baseball game once. These small, isolated acts of decency were presented as proof of a lifetime of devotion. They were checks she was now trying to cash. Then she moved to the party. You embarrassed me, Monica. You embarrassed all of us. You took a beautiful day for Mom and Dad and made it all about you. We were just joking with you, trying to get you to lighten up. It's how we show love. You always take everything so seriously. You always have. It was a show. I saw that now. It was all a public relations campaign. They weren't trying to get me to lighten up. They were trying to establish a narrative. The narrative of Monica, the difficult, unstable, ungrateful niece. The kind of person who might cause a problem over something like a house. The kind of person whose claims you could easily dismiss. They weren't just trying to sell a house. They were trying to sell a story about me. The email ended with a plea. Just call Mike. That's all you have to do. Call him and work this out. Don't do this to us. Don't tear this family apart over a building. A building doesn't keep you warm at night. Family does. My finger hovered over the screen. A building doesn't keep you warm at night. But a family that sets you on fire to keep themselves warm is not a family. It's a pyre. I didn't reply. I forwarded the email to Arthur Davies with a single line, "For your records." Then I created a new rule in my inbox. All emails from my mother's address and my aunts and my uncles were to be sent directly to a folder named correspondence. I would not be sending them to the void. I would be sending them to my lawyer. Their words were no longer insults. They were evidence. A week passed in quiet resolve. The correspondence folder grew. The frantic anger gave way to wounded accusations, then to a calculated, deafening silence from everyone except my mother, whose emails became a daily, desperate monologue. I worked, I paid my bills. I slept through the night for the first time in a decade. I was dismantling a lifetime of anxiety piece by piece. The low hum in my bones was gone. Then, on a Tuesday afternoon, a new email arrived. It wasn't from my family. It was from Uncle Mike's lawyer to Arthur Davies. Arthur had forwarded it to me without comment. The tone was conciliatory, professional. It was Mike's voice, but filtered through a $1,000 suit. It said they acknowledged the unfortunate misunderstanding regarding the trust. It claimed my uncle had been acting on outdated information and was deeply regretful for the distress this had caused. Then came the offer. It was a settlement. They would formally terminate the illegal sale. In exchange for my trouble and to reaffirm the family bond, they were prepared to offer me a portion of the proceeds from a new sale, a legal one. They would sell the house and give me 10% of the net profit. It was a brilliant move. It wasn't a threat. It wasn't an apology. It was a business proposal. It was an attempt to reframe the entire situation. This wasn't a betrayal anymore. It was a negotiation. They were trying to buy my silence, to buy my compliance, to turn my grandfather's gift into a payoff. 10%. That was the price of admission back into the family. That was the fee for pretending none of this ever happened. I stared at the email. I could see Uncle Mike's hand all over it. The cool logic, the appeal to greed. The assumption that, like them, I had a price. He had left me a shield, my grandfather. The trust was his last act of protection. But it was passive, a wall. It was meant to stop an attack. It was not a weapon. I picked up my phone. I didn't look at the correspondence folder. I didn't think about the party. I dialed Arthur Davies. He answered on the second ring. Arthur Davies. "Arthur, it's Monica," I said. My voice was calm. The air in my fortress was cool and still. "I've read the offer. And it's not acceptable." There was a pause. "I agree," he said. "What is our counter?" I looked out my window at the city moving on below me, unaware and indifferent. The humiliation at the party wasn't the worst part. The discovery of the sale wasn't the worst part. The worst part was the chilling realization that they would do it all again, in a heartbeat, if they thought they could get away with it. The worst part was knowing their love was not just conditional. It was tactical. "There is no counter, Arthur," I said, "and there is no negotiation." "What do you want to do, Monica?" A new thought took shape. It was cold and clear and sharp. They had tried to discredit me, to paint me as unstable. They had used a public stage to do it. "The trust," I said. "My grandfather named me the sole heir to that property, not a shareholder, not a partner." "That's correct," Arthur said, his voice patient. "So I don't want 10% of a sale," I said. "I want the house." The line was silent for a moment. I could picture him sitting in his leather chair, processing. He wasn't rattled, he was calculating. "You want to take possession of the property," he stated. It wasn't a question. "Yes," I said. "And I want them to pay the property taxes they've neglected for the past 2 years, and I want them to pay your fee. All of it." This was no longer a defense. It was an attack. "I see," Arthur said slowly. The smile was back in his voice. "I'll draft a letter." The call with Arthur ended. I set my phone down on the kitchen counter. It didn't make a sound, but in my head it was the clang of a heavy iron gate swinging shut. I was on the other side of it now. There was a strange lightness in my chest, a feeling that wasn't relief, but a kind of weightless clarity. For years, I had carried the family peace on my back. It was a heavy, awkward burden, and I had contorted myself into unnatural shapes to keep from dropping it. Now I had let it fall. I had let it shatter. The silence in my apartment was different. It was no longer the deafening emptiness I returned to after family gatherings. It was the charged quiet of a command center. The air itself felt strategic. I walked to the window and looked down at the city lights, little sparks of anonymous life. I had always felt isolated from them. Tonight, I felt fortified by them. I had not just rejected their offer, I had rejected the entire premise of their power. The unspoken rule that my compliance was the price of admission. The idea that their comfort was more important than my dignity. I had just told them the price was too high, and I was sending them the bill. The first volley from Arthur's office went out the next morning. A crisp, formal email with a PDF attachment. The language was cold, precise, and utterly devoid of the emotional blackmail that was my family's native tongue. It stated my claim to the house under the explicit terms of the trust, cited the illegality of their attempted sale, and presented my demand. Full title transferred to my name, with all associated legal and administrative costs to be borne by them, the trustees. It was a declaration of war written in billable hours. I spent the day waiting. I expected a storm. What I got for hours was a profound and unnerving silence. It was a different kind of silence than the one in my apartment. This was the quiet of a cornered animal, the held breath before a scream. The scream started at 4:17 p.m. My phone, sitting on the coffee table, lit up with Aunt Sarah's name. I watched it buzz, a frantic, angry vibration. I let it go to voicemail. A second later, a text. "You have no idea what you've done." It wasn't a warning. It was a prophecy she intended to fulfill. Then Uncle Mike, a call. I ignored it. A text. "Monica, this is not the way. We can still be reasonable. Call me." It was a performance of rationality. The calm patriarch trying to talk the hysterical woman off the ledge. The same ledge he had pushed me toward. He wasn't offering reason. He was offering a return to the old order, where his version of reasonable was the only one that mattered. Then the one I had been bracing for. My mother. Her call came, and I felt a familiar pang in my gut, the ghost of an old duty. I almost answered. My thumb hovered over the screen. But the woman on the other end of that line wasn't the mother I needed. She was her sibling's sister. I let it ring. Her text message was a masterpiece of passive aggression. "I don't know what you're trying to prove, but you're tearing this family apart. Your grandparents are devastated, and after everything we've done for you." I read the words again. Tearing this family apart. As if the family was a beautiful whole thing that I had ripped, not a fractured, dysfunctional machine that demanded my pieces to keep running. Your grandparents are devastated. A shield, using the two people I still felt a flicker of uncomplicated love for as human armor. After everything we've done for you. And there it was, the invoice for a love I had never truly received. The words didn't hurt. That was the shocking part. They were just data. I saw the strategy behind each sentence, the guilt, the shame, the appeal to a loyalty I no longer felt. It was like watching a magician and seeing all the wires. The trick no longer worked. The phone buzzed and lit up all evening, a chorus of cousins and distant relatives. Their messages were all variations on the same theme, a script likely handed down from Uncle Mike. "This is crazy. Can't you just talk to them? Family is everything." They were the flying monkeys, the messengers sent to reinforce the narrative. I was the problem. My refusal to be reasonable was the sin. Not the theft, not the humiliation. My reaction was the crime. I did not reply to a single one. My silence was a new kind of weapon. Before, it was consent. Now, it was a wall. The next morning, I did something I hadn't planned. I picked up my phone and called my grandparents' landline. It was time to bypass the propaganda machine. My grandmother answered, her voice frail. "Monica?" "Hi, Grandma. It's me." "Oh, Monica," she said, and her voice was thick with a coach sadness. "Your mother told us. We're just so heartbroken by all this." "What did she tell you, Grandma?" I asked, my tone gentle. "That you're suing. That you're angry about the house. Sarah said you were never happy with what you had." I closed my eyes. It was a perfect recitation of the official story. I was the ungrateful, grasping niece. "Grandma, did you know that Grandpa left the house to me in the trust?" There was a pause, a genuine one. Well, I knew he wanted you taken care of. He always worried about you being on your own. Mike and Sarah said selling it was the best way to do that, to give you a nest egg. He had left me a shield, and they had told me it was a burden. Is Grandpa there? I asked. I heard her call for him. A moment later, his voice came on the line, quieter and more gravelly than I remembered. Monica. Hi, Grandpa. Your grandmother's all worked up, he said, skipping the pleasantries. What's this about? It's about the house on Elm Street, I said simply. Uncle Mike and Aunt Sarah were trying to sell it. They told us. They said you wanted the money, he stated. It wasn't an accusation. It was a fact he was checking. They were selling it without telling me, I clarified. And the trust you and Grandpa set up says they can't do that. It says the house belongs to me. Silence. A long, heavy silence on his end of the line. It was the sound of an old man rewinding decades of memory, checking his work. The trust, he finally said, his voice slow and deliberate. Your grandfather, my brother, he was a precise man. He wanted you to have a place, a foundation. He said a person needs a foundation. My breath caught in my throat. He put that clause in for a reason, my grandfather continued, his voice gaining a hard edge I hadn't heard in years. He didn't trust easily, not even his own. And there it was, the truth. Not from a lawyer, not from a document, but from the one person who stood at the source. My great-uncle hadn't just left me a house. He had left me a warning. He knew his own family. They didn't tell you, did they, Grandpa? I asked softly. They told us a story, he said, the weariness of a lifetime in his voice. People tell the stories that suit them. We talked for a few more minutes. I didn't ask him to take my side. I didn't need him to. I just needed him to know the truth. When we hung up, a piece of the puzzle clicked into place. My grandparents weren't collaborators. They were the first victims of the story, the primary audience for the lie. The knowledge didn't make me soft, it made me colder. My anger, which had been a hot, messy thing, was cooling into something harder, something like steel. 2 days later, Arthur called. We have a response, he said. His voice was as calm as ever. And they've withdrawn their initial offer as expected, he began. They've presented a new one. They will concede the title of the house to you. I waited. There was a but coming. There was always a but. But, he continued, they are valuing their work as trustees. They've proposed that you buy out their interest, as they put it. They're asking for 40% of the home's appraised market value. I almost laughed. It was so audacious. They were trying to make me pay for the privilege of not being robbed. They were billing me for the time they spent trying to betray me. That's not the interesting part, Arthur said. Their lawyer included a personal note. He writes that his clients are deeply wounded and hope to avoid a painful and public court proceeding that would inevitably cause irreparable damage to family bonds and personal reputations. I saw it, the final move. It wasn't a settlement offer, it was a threat. They were threatening to do to me in a courtroom what they had already done at the party, to put me on a public stand and perform my character assassination for a new audience. They believed the threat of that humiliation, of airing whatever fabricated dirty laundry they could invent, would be enough. They thought I would pay 40% of a house's value to avoid being embarrassed. They still thought I was the same person who sat at that table and quietly took the blows. They still didn't understand. The worst part wasn't the humiliation. The worst part was believing I had to endure it. And I didn't believe that anymore. Monica? Arthur asked, pausing for my reaction. 40% is absurd, of course. But it's a starting point for negotiation. We can likely get them down to 10 or 15, perhaps even less. I looked out my window again, at my fortress, at the city that didn't know my name. The public spectacle they were threatening me with, it had already happened. I had already survived it. There was nothing left to be afraid of. No, I said. My voice was quiet, but it filled the space around me. No negotiation? Arthur asked, a hint of surprise in his tone. No, I repeated. Tell them I'm not interested in their offer. Tell them I'm not interested in their story about being wounded. Tell them their threat is meaningless. I took a breath. Tell them I'll see them in court. I hung up the phone with Arthur Davies. The silence in my apartment was different now. It was no longer the deafening emptiness of isolation. It was the quiet of a command center. The hum of the refrigerator, the distant sigh of traffic, they were the sounds of a fortress preparing for a siege. I had said the words, "See them in court." The threat that had held me hostage for my entire life, the threat of public shame, of being cast out, of having the family's carefully curated story weaponized against me, had been deployed, and I had not broken. I had simply sidestepped it. The worst had already happened at that party. Everything now was just paperwork. For 2 weeks, the silence from my family was a living thing. It was a pressure against the windows, a weight on the front door. Their rage had been loud and immediate, a wildfire. This quiet was the chilling smoke that follows, promising that the embers are still hot, still spreading underground. They were gathering their stories, polishing their narratives. My Aunt Sarah was likely holding court on the phone, her voice a performance of wounded concern. We just don't know what's gotten into her. We tried to be generous. Uncle Mike would be more strategic, laying the groundwork with quiet, disappointed sighs to distant relatives. It's a shame. We just wanted to give her a fresh start. It was a public relations campaign. I was the unstable, ungrateful niece, and they were the long-suffering saints. I did not wait for their next move. I began to prepare. My apartment, the house my great-uncle had left me, stopped being a backdrop. It became my partner. I walked through the rooms, touching the door frames, running my hand along the worn spines of his books. He had left me more than a building. He had left me a shield. I started methodically, cleaning out the small study he'd kept. It wasn't an act of purging his memory, but of claiming it. I found old tax returns, warranties for appliances long since replaced, and a small box of photographs. In one, a much younger version of my great-uncle stood with his arm around me. I was maybe 10, gap-toothed and beaming. We were on the front porch of this very house, his house, my house. I felt a low hum in my bones, a vibration that wasn't fear. It was resolve. The phone call came on a Tuesday afternoon. The caller ID read Mom. My hand hovered over the screen. For a lifetime, that name had meant an obligation, a summons, a duty to answer and absorb whatever anxiety she needed to offload. Now it was just a name. I let it ring until it went to voicemail. I knew she wouldn't leave a message. Leaving a message would create a record, and my mother's greatest skill was plausible deniability. An hour later, there was a knock at my door. I knew it was her. It was the knock of someone who believes they have a right to enter, a proprietary rhythm that was both hesitant and demanding. I looked through the peephole. Her face was pinched with worry, a look I knew well. It was the face she wore when she was about to ask me to betray myself for her comfort. I opened the door, but did not move out of the doorway. I became a human gate. "Hi," I said. My voice was even. "Monica, thank God." I was so worried. She tried to step forward, to initiate the hug that was always more like a cage. I didn't move. "Worried about what?" Her practiced concern faltered. "Well, you didn't answer your phone." I don't know what I thought. This was the opening script, the one where I was supposed to feel guilty, to apologize for causing her worry, and in doing so, accept the premise that I was subject to her surveillance. I did not apologize. I was busy. "What do you need?" The directness threw her. Her eyes darted past me into the hole of my apartment as if looking for evidence of the chaos she imagined my life to be. "Can I come in? We need to talk." "We're talking now," I said. It was not unkind, it was a statement of fact. Her face hardened. The mask of the worried mother slipped, revealing the exasperated enabler beneath. "Don't be like this, Monica. This is ridiculous, you have to stop this." "Stop what?" This whole lawyer thing. You're tearing the family apart over a house." Her words hung in the air. Over a house. As if it were a dispute over a piece of furniture, as if I hadn't been publicly flayed to clear the path for their crime. "They are trying to steal my home," I said, my voice dropping to just above a whisper. "The home your uncle left to me, and you watched them. You let them." "That's not fair," she snapped, her voice rising. "Sarah and Mike have done so much for this family. They were trying to do what's best for everyone." Best for everyone. It was the family motto. It meant what was best for the loudest, most demanding members. Their son needed a down payment, I stated. It wasn't a question. My mother flinched. The truth was a blunt instrument she preferred to avoid. "He's your cousin. Family is supposed to help family." Then they should have helped him with their own money, I said, and not with mine. A dark red flush crept up her neck. This was the part where I was supposed to crumble, to yield to the sheer force of her righteous anger, the anger of a woman whose peace has been disturbed. "You are being so selfish," she hissed. "After everything they've done, you have no idea what you're doing. They will drag your name through the mud. They will tell everyone everything. Is that what you want?" I looked at my mother, at her trembling hands and her furious, desperate eyes. She wasn't here to save me. She was here to save herself from the inconvenience of the fight. She was the messenger for the crown, sent to demand my surrender. For the first time, I saw her not as my mother, but as their agent, and I felt a profound, chilling calm. The last emotional tether to my old life, the desperate need for her approval, finally snapped. It made no sound. It was just gone. "They already did their worst," I said softly. "At the party, remember?" I held her gaze. "The rest," I said, "is just business." She stared at me, speechless. She was looking at a stranger. The compliant, wounded daughter she knew how to manage was gone. In her place was a woman who would not yield. She took a step back. "I don't know who you are anymore," she whispered. It was meant to be an accusation. It sounded like a victory. "I'm Monica," I said. "I'm 40 years old." She turned and walked away without another word. I closed the door, and the lock clicking into place was the most satisfying sound I had ever heard. A week later, a card arrived. It was thick, cream-colored stock. The address was written in my grandmother's shaky, elegant script. My hands trembled as I opened it. I expected another plea, another demand. Inside, there was no pre-written sentiment, just a few lines in my grandfather's blocky handwriting. "We heard what is happening. Your great-uncle was a good man. He wanted you to have the house. We are thinking of you." There was no signature. None was needed. I sank onto the sofa, the card held tight in my hand. It was not a promise of intervention. It was not a declaration of war on their children. It was something smaller and infinitely more precious. It was validation, a quiet acknowledgement from across the battle lines, a whisper of truth in a hurricane of lies. I cried then, not for the pain my family had caused, but for the profound relief of being seen. The next day, Arthur Davies called. His voice was as calm as ever. "Monica," he said, "we've received their official response." I sat up straighter. "And they're not backing down. They've filed a petition with the court to invalidate the clause in the trust, claiming it was made under undue influence and is contrary to the trust's overall intent. It was a lie, a fabrication spun from thin air, but it was a legal argument. They're formally accusing my great-uncle?" I asked, a fresh wave of cold anger washing over me. "They're formally accusing you of influencing him," Arthur corrected gently. "It's the character assassination we discussed. This is the opening move." I looked around the quiet apartment at the box of old photographs on the coffee table. I thought of my great-uncle's kind eyes, of the home he had built, of the legacy he had entrusted to me. They weren't just fighting me for a house anymore. They were trying to rewrite history, to poison the one good thing I had. "What's next?" I asked. My voice was steady. The tears from yesterday had washed away the last of my fear. "Discovery," Arthur said. "We will request every email, every text message, every financial document they have related to the trust and the property sale, and they will do the same to you. It's time to open the books." The private war was over. The public one was about to begin. "Okay," I said, "let's open the books." The petition was a declaration of war. It arrived not as a single dramatic event, but as a quiet notification in my inbox. An email from Arthur Davies with a PDF attachment. The subject line was clinical, stripped of all emotion. Estate of Charles Miller, court filing. I had been expecting it. Arthur had warned me, but the reality of it felt different. It felt like a cold weight settling in my chest. This is the part of a lawsuit they don't show in the movies. It isn't just dramatic courtroom speeches. It's the slow, grinding machinery of procedure. It's the paperwork, the endless, invasive paperwork designed to break you long before you ever see a judge. I opened the attachment. The legal language was dense, but the story it told was brutally simple. They were formally accusing me of undue influence over my great-uncle Charles. They painted a picture of a lonely, vulnerable old man and a manipulative, greedy niece who had isolated him from his loving family and tricked him into signing away a valuable asset. The words were lies. But they were carefully constructed lies. They were lies dressed up in legal formatting, signed and filed with the court. They had made their narrative official. It was the party all over again, but this time the stage was a courtroom, and the insults were filed as evidence. The worst part wasn't the petition itself. The worst part came a week later. Another email from Arthur, another attachment. This one was called First Request for Production of Documents and Interrogatories. Questions I was required to answer under oath. I scrolled through them. List every gift you received from the grantor Charles Miller from January 1st, 2010 to the present, including its estimated monetary value. State the nature and frequency of your communications with the grantor for the last 15 years of his life. Identify every person you have spoken to about the grantor's trust. This was their strategy, not to find the truth, but to create a new one. They wanted to build a portrait of me as a gold digger, a user. They wanted to quantify my relationship with my great uncle in dollars and cents, to strip it of all love and leave only a transaction. But the document requests were where the real attack lay. They wanted everything. Request number 4. All correspondence, including but not limited to letters, emails, and text messages, between you and the grantor for the past 10 years. My emails with Uncle Charles were mundane. He'd send me links to articles about bird watching. I'd send him pictures of my cat. We'd make plans for lunch. They weren't looking for evidence. They were looking for a single sentence they could twist. A moment of frustration, a complaint about work, a casual word that could be reframed as manipulation. They were conducting a scavenger hunt for my flaws. Request number 7. All your financial statements, including bank accounts, investment accounts, and credit card statements for the past 7 years. To prove I didn't need the house, to paint my desire for what was rightfully mine as greed. They would hold up my 401k, my modest savings, my sensible car, and present it as proof that I was trying to take something from the family that they presumably deserved more. My independence was now evidence against me. Request number 9. Your employment records, including all performance reviews for the past 7 years. To find a weakness, a bad review, a disagreement with a boss, anything to establish a pattern of behavior, a character flaw. Then I saw it, the one that made the air leave my lungs. Request number 11. All records of psychological or psychiatric treatment, including but not limited to therapist notes, diagnoses, and billing statements for the past 10 years. My breath caught. A low hum started in my bones, the old familiar signal of an attack. But this time it was different. It wasn't the hum of anxiety. It was the hum of a live wire. This was the point. This was the real weapon. They wanted to take the one place I had gone to heal from them and turn it into a weapon against me. They wanted to put my grief, my anxieties, my private struggles on public display. They wanted to tell the court, see, she's unstable. She's unreliable. My therapy was the space where I had learned to build boundaries, where I had learned that their behavior was abuse, not love, where I had found the language to understand my own life. They wanted to burn it all down. I stared at the request on my screen. I thought of my therapist's quiet office, the one place on earth I didn't have to pretend. I thought of the things I had told her, about the party, about my mother's silence, about the long, lonely years of trying to be small enough to be loved by them. They knew I went to therapy. My mother knew. She had once referred to it as me, paying someone to listen to my complaints. For them, therapy wasn't a tool for health, it was an admission of defect. And now they were demanding the receipts. The old Monica would have shattered. The old Monica would have called Arthur, crying, saying she couldn't do it. She would have surrendered just to protect their one private space. She would have let them have the house, just to keep them out of her head. But the old Monica was a ghost. She had died in my car on the ride home from that party. I closed my eyes. I didn't feel shame. I didn't feel fear. I felt a profound, clarifying coldness. It was the same feeling I had during Uncle Mike's toast, that moment of pure detached observation. I saw their strategy with perfect clarity. Their goal isn't just to win. Their goal is to make the truth too expensive to defend, too humiliating to pursue. They thought this would be the final humiliation, the one that would make me crawl back and beg for a settlement. I was wrong before. The worst part wasn't the party. The worst part wasn't the illegal sale. The worst part wasn't even the lawsuit. The worst part is the realization that the people who are supposed to love you will meticulously and strategically dismantle your life for money, and they will call it justice. I sat there for a long time, the glow of the monitor lighting my face. My apartment, once a lonely sanctuary, now felt like a command center. The silence wasn't empty anymore. It was focused. They had made a critical mistake. They had taught me their rules. They had shown me how the game was played. You don't use emotion. You use procedure. You don't argue. You file. You take the other person's life and you turn it into a series of requests for production. Discovery goes both ways. A slow smile touched my lips. It felt unfamiliar, sharp. They wanted my therapy records? Fine. Then I wanted Aunt Sarah's credit card statements to see how much she spent on the party that was supposedly in my grandparents' honor. They wanted my emails with Uncle Charles? Fine. Then I wanted every single email and text between Uncle Mike and the real estate agent from the moment they first contacted him. I wanted to see the commission agreement. I wanted to see how they described the property. My property. They wanted my performance reviews? Then I wanted Uncle Mike's business tax returns for the last 10 years. I wanted to see the finances of the man who called me irresponsible. I wanted to see the man who was so desperate for this sale. They had started a war of character assassination. They just assumed I wouldn't shoot back. They assumed I was still the quiet one, the one who absorbed the blows and kept the peace. I picked up my phone and called Arthur. "Arthur, it's Monica," I said. My voice was even calm. "I've reviewed the discovery request. I'm not dropping the suit." There was a pause on the other end. "Monica, request number 11 is—" "I know what it is," I interrupted, my tone cutting off any attempt to soften the blow. "It's their strategy, and we're going to use it right back. I'm making a list." "A list? Of documents and interrogatories for them," I said, "for Sarah, for Mike, for my mother." The silence on the other end of the line was different now. It was the sound of a lawyer recognizing a shift in his client. The victim was gone. "Send it over when you're ready," he said, his voice now purely professional. "We'll draft our own requests." I hung up the phone. I opened a new document on my computer. The cursor blinked on the blank page, a steady rhythmic pulse, like a heartbeat. I began to type. They wanted my therapy notes. They wanted to take the most vulnerable parts of me, the quiet confessions I made in a safe room, and turn them into a weapon. They believed that if they could paint me as unstable, they could convince a judge I was suggestible, weak, an easy mark for a lonely old man. They thought it would be my breaking point. It was my turning point. A cold, clean fire started burning in my chest, a feeling I hadn't recognized before. It wasn't shame. It wasn't hurt. It was rage forged into something sharp and useful. I picked up the phone and called Arthur. "Monica," he said, his voice calm, steady. "The anchor in my storm?" "I've been thinking about our response." "I know what I want to do," I said. My own voice sounded strange to me. Lower, flat. "They want to see inside my head. I want to see inside their bank accounts." There was a pause on the line, not of shock, but of consideration. "That is an avenue we can pursue," Arthur said carefully. "Discovery is a two-way street, but I need you to be certain, Monica. This isn't just a legal tactic. It's a declaration of war." I looked around my apartment. The space that had once felt like a symbol of my loneliness, the deafening emptiness my mother pitied, now felt like a command center. It was quiet. It was clean. It was mine. "They declared war at the party, Arthur," I said. "I'm just finally fighting back." "All right then," he said. The shift in his tone was subtle, but I heard it. The gentle advisor was gone. In his place was the strategist. "Let's make a list." We didn't just make a list. We drafted a blueprint for dismantling a fortress. First, Uncle Mike and Aunt Sarah. We requested 5 years of complete financial records, every bank statement, every credit card bill, every loan application, every investment portfolio, every line of credit. They wanted to use a few therapy bills to call me unstable. I would use their own numbers to prove they were desperate. Humor was their weapon of choice. Mine was math. Second, the family narrative. We requested all communications, every email, every text message, every group chat log, between any and all of them that mentioned my name, my great-uncle's name, or the house, from the day he died until today. They had performed their character assassination in public. I wanted to see the script they wrote in private. Let them see their own words, their own casual cruelty. typed out on legal letterhead. Let them see the conspiracy in black and white. Third, the motive. What about their son? I asked Arthur. David, the one my uncle said needed a good start. We can include him, Arthur confirmed. What do you suspect? I don't suspect, I said. I know. The price of admission to my family is broadcasting everyone's business. David dropped out of college with a mountain of debt and tried to start some kind of online business that failed. Mike bailed him out. It was a show, a public relations campaign. Poor David, he just needs a little help. Monica has so much, and she doesn't even have a family to spend it on. We'll request David's financial records as well, Arthur said. If your uncle co-signed loans or funneled money to him, it strengthens our argument that the pressure to sell wasn't just opportunistic. It was necessary. Finally, the audience. We would issue deposition notices to my mother, my father, my other aunts and uncles, the cousins who had laughed at the toast. They had been a willing audience for my humiliation. Now they would be a reluctant one for a court-appointed lawyer. They would have to answer questions under oath. Did you laugh at the toast? Did you think it was funny? Were you aware that Michael was trying to sell a house that didn't belong to him? What did you do? What did you say? Their silence, which had always been a form of applause for my tormentors, would now be a liability. When Arthur finished reading the list of demands back to me, the cold fire in my chest settled into a low, steady hum. I had spent my entire life absorbing their blows, trying to make myself smaller to keep the peace. Now I was taking up all the space I wanted. Send it, I said. The official term for the documents was request for production. I thought of it as a volley of missiles aimed directly at the foundations of their carefully constructed world. For 2 days, there was only silence. It was a different kind of silence than before. It wasn't the heavy, waiting silence of dread. It was the quiet, charged air before a lightning strike. I worked, I ate, I slept better than I had in a year. The fight, it turned out, was less exhausting than the surrender. Then, on the third day, my phone rang. My mother's name flashed on the screen. I let it ring 3 times before I answered. Hello, Mom. Monica, what have you done? There was no preamble, just a geyser of panicked fury. Her voice was thin and sharp, an ice pick to the ear. It's called discovery, I said, my voice even. It's part of the lawsuit your brother filed against me. This is not discovery. This is harassment. You're asking for everything. Your Uncle Mike's private finances, your cousins. What is wrong with you? I listened. I recognized the strategy. It was the same one they always used. The problem wasn't the initial offense. The problem was my reaction to it. I wasn't supposed to react. You ruined the party. You're tearing the family apart. They asked for my therapy notes, Mom, I said calmly. That's different, she shrieked. They're just trying to understand what's going on with you. Why you're being so vindictive. Your uncle is a good man. He has always been good to you. A good man. The words hung in the air between us. A good man who orchestrated my public humiliation. A good man who broke the law. A good man who tried to steal my inheritance. A good man who was now suing his niece. The lie was so vast, so complete, it was almost impressive. He's not a good man, Mom, I said. The words came out without emotion. A simple statement of fact. Like saying the sky is blue or water is wet. And you know it. How dare you, she whispered. The fury was gone, replaced by something colder. The sound of a door slamming shut. After everything we have done for you, your aunt and uncle have been worried sick about you. Sarah called me in tears. You have dragged all of us into your mess. My mess. The world tilted for a second. The party, the toast, the illegal sale, the lawsuit. It was all my mess. I had made it simply by existing, by being single, by being successful, by being given a gift. I didn't drag anyone into anything, I said. They walked in all on their own. They can walk out by dropping the lawsuit and signing the house over to me, the way it was supposed to be. You are breaking my heart, Monica, she said. It was her final weapon, the guilt, the appeal to a daughter's love. It had worked 1,000 times before, but the person she was talking to wasn't there anymore. That Monica had died in the car on the way home from the party. I was her ghost, and ghosts don't feel guilt. I have to go, Mom, I said. I hung up before she could reply. I stood in the center of my living room, the phone still in my hand. The hum in my bones was steady. I wasn't shaking. My face wasn't hot. I felt nothing. It was a relief. An email dinged on my laptop. It was from Arthur. The subject line was protective order. Monica, the email began. As expected, opposing counsel has filed a motion for a protective order regarding our discovery requests, claiming they are unduly burdensome and intended to harass. They are particularly agitated about the financial records and the intra-family communications. I read the legalese, but my eyes caught on the final sentence. Their reaction is disproportionately aggressive. They're panicking. This is very good for us. I closed the laptop. They had built their family on a foundation of secrets and lies, held together by the unspoken rule that no one ever questioned the narrative. They believed it was a fortress, but I had found the cracks, and I had just driven a wedge into every single one of them. The worst part wasn't the humiliation. The worst part was believing I deserved it. Now I know. It was never about me. It was about the house. It was about the money. And they were terrified I was finally going to prove it. The email to Arthur, with its attached motion, was a declaration of war. I clicked send, and the quiet of my apartment felt different. It was no longer the sound of emptiness. It was the sound of a held breath. I had crossed a line, not a legal line, but a familial one. I had refused to be the bigger person. I had refused to absorb the blow for the sake of a peace that never included me. I had taken their weapon, public exposure, and aimed it right back at them. For 48 hours, there was only silence. A deep, ringing void where the frantic calls and angry texts used to be. It was the silence of strategy. The silence of a predator that has been unexpectedly wounded and has retreated into the shadows to assess the damage. I knew who would be sent to break it. My phone rang on a Tuesday evening. The caller ID read Mom. I let it ring 3 times before answering, a small petty ceremony of control. Monica. Her voice was tight, stretched thin over a wire of fury. Hi, Mom. Do you have any idea what you've done? There was no preamble. No, how are you? Just the immediate, undiluted accusation. It was the same tone she used when I was 10 and had tracked mud on her clean floor. I stopped an illegal sale of my property, I said. My voice was level. It was a strange out-of-body experience, hearing myself sound so calm. Your property? She scoffed. The sound was ugly. You're tearing this family apart over a house you never even visit? A house that belongs to all of us in spirit. In spirit. The 2 words that had governed my life. The justification for every compromise, every swallowed insult, every time I was expected to give and they were entitled to take. The trust document seems to disagree with the spirit of it, I said, a sharp intake of breath on her end. Your uncle is a good man. He has provided for this family. He and Sarah have been under a lot of stress. You have no idea. Then maybe their financial records will help me understand that stress. That was it, the detonation. You are a cruel, selfish girl, she hissed. We gave you everything. We loved you. And this is how you repay us? By trying to humiliate us? To put your uncle's private business in the street for everyone to see? After everything he's done for me? For your grandparents? I felt a strange, cold clarity descend. It was like watching a film of my own life. I could see the strings. I could see the puppeteer. She wasn't talking about love. She was talking about transactions. Uncle Mike had done things for her, so I was expected to pay her debt. The price of admission was my silence, my house, my dignity. The worst part wasn't the accusation. The worst part was realizing she was the one who had taught me the price. She had spent my entire life training me to pay it. Every time she told me to ignore a comment, to let it go, to not make waves, she wasn't teaching me resilience. She was grooming me to be a sacrifice. He didn't do those things for you, Mom, I said, and the words felt like stone in my mouth. He did them for an audience. He did them so he could call in the debt later. I'm the debt. You don't know what you're talking about, she sobbed. But the tears were pure performance. They were another weapon, meant to trigger guilt. They didn't work anymore. The mechanism inside me was broken. Is that all? I asked. The line went quiet for a moment. I could hear her breathing, ragged and shocked. I had broken the script. I was supposed to be crying too. I was supposed to be begging for forgiveness. Your Aunt Sarah had to go to the doctor, she finally said, her voice dripping with manufactured pity. Her heart, the stress you've put her under. It was a show for an audience of one, me. They were trying to frame my self-defense as an attack. They were building a narrative where their greed was a mistake, but my reaction to it was a mortal sin. "I hope she feels better," I said. It was the most dishonest thing I had ever said in my life. I hung up before she could respond. I stood in the middle of my living room and did not cry. I felt nothing. The low hum in my bones was gone. The space where my mother's love was supposed to be wasn't a painful void anymore. It was just empty. A vacated property. I was an orphan now. Not in the literal sense, but in the emotional one. The final tether had been cut, and the only thing I felt was relief. A week later, the first documents arrived. Arthur called me. "They're trying to bury us, Monica. 10 boxes of paper. Bank statements, old tax returns, receipts from a decade ago. It's a classic delay tactic. They're hoping we'll run out of money or patience before we find anything." "They're hoping I'll run out of money," I corrected him. "They know I'm paying for this myself." "Well," Arthur said, a grim smile in his voice, "I've got a good paralegal and a lot of coffee. Let's see what they're so desperate to hide." They didn't hide it well enough. The first clue wasn't in the bank statements, it was in the credit card bills. Uncle Mike, the family's financial guru, the man who lectured me at every holiday about my frivolous spending on travel, had 3 maxed out high-interest credit cards. The charges were a portrait of desperation: cash advances, payments to other credit cards, a failed online business selling imported watches, a series of investments in a guaranteed real estate scheme that had evaporated. He wasn't a strategist. He was a gambler who had lost. Aunt Sarah's statements were just as revealing. Expensive spa memberships, weekly boutique shopping sprees, a car lease that cost more than my mortgage payment. They were living a life funded by debt, their public image of comfortable success a complete fiction. They didn't need the money from my house for a comfortable retirement. They needed it to plug a hole in a rapidly sinking ship. Their ship. I stared at the spreadsheets my paralegal had compiled. The numbers were cold, hard facts. They painted a picture of profound irresponsibility, of people who believed they were entitled to a lifestyle they could not afford. The humiliation at the party wasn't just a preemptive strike. It was a tantrum. It was the incandescent rage of people who were about to have their fantasy world collapse, and they were blaming me for it. They needed a villain for the story they were telling themselves, and then we found the email. It was buried in a file labeled Miscellaneous Correspondence, an exchange between Uncle Mike and Aunt Sarah, dated 2 weeks before the anniversary party. The subject line was simple: the Monica problem. Mike wrote, "We need to get ahead of this. If she finds out about the offer before we're ready, she could block the whole thing. We need to control the narrative. At the party, we established that she's unstable, difficult, not thinking clearly. We get the family on our side first. You start, I'll finish with the toast. Make it about concern." Sarah's reply was a single chilling sentence. "Don't worry. I know exactly what to do." I read it 3 times. My hands didn't shake. My face didn't get hot. Arthur had printed it out for me. I held a piece of paper in my hands. It was tangible. It was real. It was the truth, spelled out in black and white pixels, stripped of all subtext and plausible deniability. We established that she's unstable. I know exactly what to do. This wasn't a family squabble anymore. This was a conspiracy, a premeditated, calculated act of psychological warfare designed with a single purpose: to defraud me. The gaslighting was over. The years of wondering if I was too sensitive, if I was misinterpreting things, if I was the crazy one, it all evaporated in an instant. The fog of self-doubt that had clouded my life for decades finally burned away. I was right. It was the most terrible, most liberating realization of my life. I looked up at Arthur. He was watching me, his expression cautious, waiting for tears or an outburst. He was waiting for the victim to react, but the victim was gone. "Okay," I said. My voice was quiet, but it filled the room. "They wanted to establish that I'm unstable. Let's show them what stable looks like." He raised an eyebrow. "What do you have in mind?" "Their lawsuit claims I exerted undue influence over my great-uncle," I said, tapping the email. "This proves they planned to discredit me before I could even act. This is evidence of their intent to commit fraud. They filed a malicious lawsuit based on a lie they invented." Arthur's cautious expression slowly transformed into a sharp smile. It is, he said. It absolutely is. I don't want to settle anymore, Arthur. I don't want their offers. I don't want to just win. I want them to lose everything. I leaned forward. The world had shrunk to this conference room, this table, this piece of paper. The past was a closed book. The future was a blank page. File a countersuit, I said, for malicious prosecution and conspiracy to commit fraud. And this time, we don't ask for the house. We ask for punitive damages. We ask for a jury. I want them to stand up in a court of law and explain this email. I wanted them to explain it to the world. The email chain was short. It was titled The Monica Problem. I read it until the words became shapes, just black marks on a white screen. The letters blurred. The meaning did not. It only became sharper, a shard of glass in my mind. Establish that she's unstable. Make it public so she has no credibility later. Mike, you do the toast. You're better at making it sound loving. It was a blueprint. The party was the construction. For a full minute, I didn't move. The air in my apartment, my sanctuary, felt thin and cold. The humming in my bones, the one that had been a low thrum of anxiety for my entire adult life, had stopped. In its place was a profound and unnerving stillness. The worst part wasn't that they had planned it. The worst part was that I was not surprised. This was the final piece of the puzzle. The one that made all the other pieces, the casual cruelties, the public jokes, the years of feeling like an outsider in my own bloodline, snap into a coherent and monstrous picture. They hadn't just stumbled into cruelty. They had workshopped it. I picked up my phone. I didn't have to look up Arthur Davies' number. It was etched into my memory. He answered on the second ring. Monica. I have it, I said. My voice was flat, a stranger's voice. The smoking gun. Tell me, he said, his own tone unwavering, a lighthouse in a storm. I forwarded him the email. I heard the soft ping of its arrival on his end. I listened to the silence as he read. It was the longest silence of my life. It was a silence in which my old life was dying and a new one had not yet begun. Finally, he cleared his throat. Well, he said, and the single word was heavier than a book of law. This is not just a smoking gun, Monica. This is a signed confession. What do we do now, I asked. Now, Arthur said, his voice shifting, the calm giving way to the sharp, clean edge of a strategist. We stop defending. We start prosecuting. He used the word I had been thinking. It felt like a key turning in a lock. They accused you of undue influence, he continued. They filed a lawsuit to paint you as a manipulative predator who took advantage of an old man. They did this knowing they were the ones committing fraud. This email is evidence of conspiracy. It's evidence of malicious prosecution. I listened. I was a student. The subject was my own life. We file a countersuit, he said. We demand the case be dismissed with prejudice. We demand the title to the house be transferred to you immediately, and we sue them for damages. Damages, I repeated the word. It sounded clinical. Punitive damages, he corrected. This isn't about compensating you for legal fees. This is about punishing them for their conduct. It's meant to be a deterrent. The law has a name for people who use the courts as a weapon to cover up a crime. I thought of Uncle Mike's face, smiling as he held up that champagne flute. I thought of Aunt Sarah's performative concern, a public relations campaign. I want a jury trial, I said. It wasn't a question. Another pause. I could almost hear Arthur nodding. Good, he said. Their story falls apart in front of 12 strangers. Your story holds. The truth is simple. Theirs requires an entire theatrical production. He was right. Their entire lives were a theatrical production. I had just been the unwilling star of their latest tragedy. I'll have the complaint drafted by morning, he said. You'll need to sign it, then we file. Okay, I said. Monica, he said, his voice softening just a fraction. Are you ready for this? I thought about the party, about my mother's face twisted in anger at me, about the laughter that felt like stones being thrown. I thought about the decades of shrinking myself to fit into their family, a space that was never meant for me. Being ready wasn't a feeling, it was a fact. The old me was gone, burned away in the fire of that public humiliation. What was left was harder, colder. Yes, I said, I am. The filing of the countersuit was not a dramatic event. There was no press conference, no shouting in a courtroom. It was an electronic document uploaded to a server in the middle of a Tuesday, a quiet digital act that was the legal equivalent of a declaration of war. I signed the papers in Arthur's office. The pen felt steady in my hand. My signature was clear and strong. It looked like the signature of a woman who knew her own name. For 48 hours, there was only silence. It was the charged, heavy quiet before a lightning strike. I went to work. I ate. I slept. The stillness inside me held. I was waiting. I knew they wouldn't respond through their lawyers first. That wasn't their way. Their way was personal. It was invasive. The call came on Thursday evening. My phone screen lit up with the one word that used to make my stomach clench. Mom. I let it ring 3 times. Then I answered. I didn't say hello. Monica? Her voice was thin, incredulous, as if she couldn't believe I had picked up. Yes. We just got a letter from your lawyer. She said the word lawyer like it was a disease. Monica, what have you done? I said nothing. I let her question hang in the air, a monument to her own willful blindness. A countersuit? She sputtered. Conspiracy to commit fraud. Punitive damages. Do you have any idea what this means? It means the truth is in a public document now, I thought. It means your brother and sister are criminals. You are suing your own family, she said, her voice rising, cracking with a practiced theatrical panic. You are trying to ruin us after everything we've done for you. That was the line, the one they always used, the price of admission. There's nothing to talk about, Mom, I said. My voice was ice. Nothing to talk about? You've dropped a bomb on this family. Sarah is a wreck. Mike can't believe it. You're tearing us apart. I almost laughed. It was a strange, bitter impulse. You built the bomb, I wanted to say. You handed it to me. You lit the fuse. I just let go. If you or anyone else in the family wishes to communicate with me, I said, the words coming out as if I were reading from a script Arthur and I had prepared. You can do so through my lawyer. His name is Arthur Davies. I believe you have his contact information. A choke sound came from her end of the line. Disbelief, rage. Your lawyer? I'm your mother, she shrieked. Now I know what that word means. It doesn't mean unconditional love. It doesn't mean protection. It means proximity. It means the person who had a front row seat to my pain my entire life and chose to look away. Her selective deafness was a choice. Her inaction was a choice. This is a legal matter now, I said. This is a family matter. No, I said, and the word was the calmest, most final thing I'd ever said. It was a family matter. You made it a legal one. I heard her take a sharp, ragged breath to unload the next volley of guilt, of shame, of accusation. I didn't wait to hear it. I hung up. I blocked her number. Then I blocked Aunt Sarah's and Uncle Mike's. One by one, I went through my contacts and erased my family from my phone. It took less than 5 minutes to dismantle a lifetime. I stood in the quiet of my apartment. The deafening emptiness I used to feel after their visits was gone. This quiet was different. It was clean. It was mine. The war had begun. And for the first time in my life, I wasn't the casualty. I was the command center. The countersuit was filed on a Tuesday. It landed not with a bang, but with a quiet digital click. A single line in an email from Arthur's office. Filed. One word. It felt like an anchor dropping, securing me to a new reality. The drift was over. I had spent my life absorbing blows, taking the hit, swallowing the insult, managing the pain. It was a full-time job with no pay and terrible hours. The price of admission to a family that never wanted me, only a version of me they could control. Filing this suit was the first time I had ever hit back. The silence that followed was different. It wasn't the strained, resentful silence of a car ride home from a holiday. This was a tactical silence, the deep, airless quiet of a vacuum. They had cut me off completely, hoping to starve me of the connection I had once craved. It was a miscalculation. They thought they were punishing me, but the silence was a gift. It was the absence of their voices in my head. The static finally cleared. In the quiet of my apartment, the space that had once felt like a symbol of my loneliness became a sanctuary, a war room. I printed every document, the trust, the illegal sale agreement, their lawsuit against me, the Monica problem email. I laid them out on my dining room table, a mosaic of betrayal. I could see it all now. The party wasn't just a preemptive strike. It was a performance designed to create a memory, to plant a story in the minds of the witnesses. Monica was unstable. Monica was selfish. Monica was cruel to her loving family. Each joke was a line of dialogue. Each laugh was applause for a scene well played. Uncle Mike's toast was the closing argument. Some of us build families, and some of us are just too busy. He had looked right at me. It wasn't a jab. It was a verdict delivered to the jury of our relatives. I was wrong. The worst part wasn't his toast. The worst part wasn't even the discovery of the sale. The worst part is seeing the architecture of their cruelty, the blueprints, the careful, deliberate, step-by-step construction of my public destruction. It was a project they had worked on together. My mother broke the silence after 2 weeks. It started with a text. "We need to talk." I ignored it. My stillness was a new muscle, and I was learning how to use it. An hour later, another. "This has gone on long enough. Call me." I stared at the screen. I could feel the pull, the old instinct to placate, to smooth things over, a low hum in my bones, the familiar vibration of anticipated surrender. I set the phone face down on the counter. The next day, she left a voicemail. I listened to it on speaker, standing over the documents on my table. Her voice, thick with a practiced, aggrieved sorrow, filled my quiet apartment. "Monica, it's Mom. I just don't understand what you're doing. Your Aunt Sarah is a wreck. She can't sleep. You've made her physically ill with this lawsuit. And for what? For a house? A pile of bricks and wood? Is that more important than your family?" She paused, as if waiting for an answer. "This isn't you, honey. You've always been the reasonable one, the quiet one. This lawyer has gotten into your head. Uncle Mike was just trying to do what was best for everyone, to handle things so you wouldn't have to worry. And this is how you thank him? By trying to ruin him?" Another pause. The air crackled with her unspoken demand. "Apologize. Fix this. Your grandparents are heartbroken. Their anniversary, their beautiful party, it's all been tainted by this ugliness. You're tearing this family apart, Monica." For money, I never thought I'd say that about my own daughter. The click of the hang-up was loud in the silence. I stood there, motionless. I felt nothing. No heat in my face, no knot in my stomach. Her words were just words. A script I'd heard 1,000 times in 1,000 different ways. Think of the family. Think of everyone else. Don't make a scene. Your feelings are an inconvenience. I picked up my phone. I did not call her back. I did not text. I opened my email and wrote a new message. To Mom. Subject: communication. All future communication must be directed to my attorney, Arthur Davies. His contact information is attached. I hit send. It was a door closing, a lock turning. It was the sound of my own survival. A week later, I was in Arthur's office. The conference room felt less like a cage now and more like a training ground. "They're going to put you on the stand," Arthur said, leaning forward. "Their lawyer will try to do exactly what your family did at that party. He will try to paint you as greedy, unstable, and vindictive." "I know," I said, my voice was even. "He will bring up the fact that you're single, that you don't have children. He will try to use your independence against you, to frame it as isolation, as proof that you couldn't possibly have had a close, loving relationship with your great uncle." I looked at the notes I had prepared. "I'm ready for that. He will ask you why you didn't just talk to them, why you had to sue your own family." I met his gaze, because they were not my family. They were a board of directors, and I was a failing asset they had decided to liquidate. Arthur smiled, a small, grim thing. "Good, that's good." He had me walk him through the party again. This time, I didn't just recount the events. I deconstructed them. I narrated the strategy behind each comment. Aunt Sarah's joke about my empty apartment wasn't a joke. It was step one: establish Monica as lonely and pathetic. The questions about my job weren't about my career. They were step two: establish Monica as selfishly focused on work instead of family. Uncle Mike's toast was the climax. Step three: deliver the public verdict that Monica has failed at the only job that matters, being a woman in our family. I spoke for an hour. I did not cry. I did not raise my voice. I was simply a woman presenting a case, the case for her own life. When I was done, Arthur was quiet for a long moment. "They never saw you, did they?" he said, his voice soft. "They only ever saw a problem to be managed." "And now they see a plaintiff," I replied. For a moment, sitting in my car after leaving his office, the weight of it all pressed down. The finality. There was no going back, not ever. A family isn't a limb you can amputate, but I had taken a scalpel to the ties that bound me to them. I felt a phantom ache, a ghost of the girl who just wanted her mother to choose her. Then I thought of the voicemail. "You're tearing this family apart." She was wrong. I wasn't tearing it apart. I was just turning on the lights. The rot was already there. It had been there all along. The email with the trial date arrived on a Friday morning. It came from the court, a sterile automated notification. Case number 23, CV881, Davies v. Miller et al. Jury trial scheduled for October 17th, 9 a.m., courtroom 4B. I read the lines over and over, a date, a time, a room number. It was no longer an abstract threat. It was an appointment. They had wanted a stage. They had wanted an audience. They were about to get both. The months between filing the countersuit and the first deposition were a strange kind of quiet. Not the deafening emptiness of my apartment after the party, but the charged silence of a storm gathering offshore. My family had gone dark. The angry calls and pleading texts from my mother stopped. All communication now flowed through the sterile filter of our lawyers. They had become a legal entity, a defendant. Sarah Clark et al. I found a strange peace in this new formality. It was clean. It was honest. For the first time in my life, our relationship had clear rules and a neutral referee. The law was a language they were being forced to learn, a language without the nuance of guilt or the leverage of shared history. I'm Monica. I'm 41 now. My birthday had passed without a single card, a fact that should have hurt but instead felt like a victory, a line drawn. My apartment was no longer a sanctuary of isolation. It was a command center. The dining table was covered in files, not plates. I didn't brace for family gatherings anymore. I prepared for legal proceedings. I reviewed timelines, highlighted inconsistencies in their sworn statements, and cross-referenced their financial records with the dates of their emails. Arthur Davies had been clear. "The depositions are the most critical phase before a trial," he'd explained over the phone, his voice as calm as ever. "It's not about winning an argument. It's about locking them into their story, on the record, under oath." He told me who they wanted to depose first, me. And he told me who we would depose first. Aunt Sarah. It was perfect, a symmetry so poetic it felt like a design. She had been the master of ceremonies for my public trial, the one who set the stage. Now she would be the first witness in mine. "Your only job during your deposition is to answer the question asked, nothing more," Arthur instructed. "And during hers, your only job is to sit there, let me work. Your silence will be more powerful than any words you could say." I understood. The worst part of the party wasn't the humiliation. The worst part was my silence. The way I sat there and took it, nodding along to my own execution. My silence in that deposition room would be different. It wouldn't be the silence of compliance. It would be the silence of judgment. The conference room at the opposing counsel's firm was designed to intimidate. A long, polished mahogany table reflected the cold, fluorescent lights above. Leather chairs sighed as you sat in them. At one end sat a court reporter, her fingers poised over her stenotype machine, a silent oracle ready to translate lies and truths into an immutable record. I chose a seat next to Arthur, placing my single notepad and pen on the table. I felt a low hum in my bones, the vibration of readiness, not fear. Then they walked in, Aunt Sarah, Uncle Mike, and their lawyer, a man with a practiced, sympathetic frown. It was the first time I had seen them since the party. Sarah had aged. The force of her personality, once a battering ram, seemed to have corroded from the inside out. She wore a soft pink sweater set, an armor of calculated fragility. She wouldn't look at me. Her eyes scanned the room, the ceiling, the water pitcher on the table, anywhere but at me. Uncle Mike, however, met my gaze just for a second. There was no warmth, no regret, just a flicker of cold assessment. He was the strategist and he was evaluating his opponent. He nodded once, a clipped, dismissive gesture before taking his seat. The performance had begun. Arthur started slowly, his questions soft, almost gentle. He asked Sarah to state her name for the record. He asked about her relationship to me. "She's my niece," Sarah said, her voice wavering just enough to signal victimhood. "My sister's daughter. We were always so close." I did not react. I simply made a note on my pad. Were. For the next hour, Arthur walked her through the family history, the trust, her role as trustee. Her answers were a masterclass in evasion. I don't recall the specifics. We always had Monica's best interest at heart. It was a complicated time for the family. She was speaking to a phantom jury, painting a picture of a dutiful aunt burdened by a difficult, ungrateful niece. She portrayed the party not as an attack, but as a loving family's clumsy attempt at an intervention. "And the toast, Mrs. Clark?" Arthur asked, his tone unchanged. "The one your husband, Michael Clark, gave?" "Oh, that," she sighed, dabbing at a dry eye with her fingertip. "Michael can be a bit theatrical. He was just worried. We all were. Monica is so alone." Her lawyer shifted in his seat, pleased. She was playing her part well. Uncle Mike watched me, waiting for me to crack, to object, to give them the emotional outburst they could use as evidence of my instability. I just listened. I let the lies hang in the air, captured one by the court reporter's silent machine. Their lies were a fortress built over decades, but I knew something they didn't fully grasp yet. I had the blueprint. I knew exactly where the cracks were. Arthur paused, letting the silence stretch. He looked down at a folder in front of him, the one I knew held the emails. He slid a single sheet of paper from it and passed it to their lawyer, who then passed it to Sarah. "I'd like to mark this as Exhibit A," Arthur said, his voice suddenly sharp, precise. "Mrs. Clark, could you please read the subject line of the email at the top of the page?" Sarah stared at the paper. The soft, pained expression on her face froze. For a moment, she was utterly still. The air in the room grew thin. "Mrs. Clark," Arthur prompted. She swallowed, a dry, clicking sound. I watched the color drain from her face, leaving behind a waxy, sallow sheen. I had seen my own face get hot with shame at that party. Now I was watching the blood leave hers. Her lawyer leaned over and whispered something to her. She shook her head, a tiny, frantic movement. "For the record," Arthur said, his voice cutting through the tension, "I will read it. The subject line is the Monica problem." Uncle Mike flinched. It was barely perceptible, a tightening around his mouth, but I saw it. The strategist had made a fatal error. He had put it in writing. "Mrs. Clark," Arthur continued, relentless now, "this is an email you sent to your husband, is it not?" Silence. "The sender is sklark@email.com. Is that your email address?" I don't know," she stammered. The fragility was no longer an act, it was real. "You don't know your own email address?" "I might have..." "Let's move on to the body of the email," Arthur said, picking up his own copy. "You wrote, and I quote, 'We need a preemptive strike before she finds out about the offer on the house. The party is the perfect venue.'" He looked up. "What did you mean by preemptive strike, Mrs. Clark?" She looked at her husband, her eyes wide with panic. He offered nothing. He just stared at the mahogany table, his own mask cracking. "I don't remember writing this," she whispered. It was the last gasp of a dying defense. "Perhaps this will refresh your memory," Arthur said, his voice like ice. "You go on to say, 'Mike, you handled the toast.' We need to paint her as selfish and unstable in front of everyone, so if she does object to the sale, no one will believe her. We need to completely discredit her." "Did I read that correctly, Mrs. Clark?" A sound escaped her, a soft, wet noise like a punctured tire. The room was a vacuum. The court reporter's fingers flew across her keys, capturing the implosion. Sarah dropped the paper and put her head in her hands. Her shoulders began to shake. But these weren't the delicate, performative sobs from before. This was the shudder of total defeat. The fortress had been breached. The blueprint was a wrecking ball. Her lawyer stood up abruptly. "We need a break. My client is unwell." Arthur nodded. "Of course." They shuffled out of the room, Sarah leaning heavily on her husband, who still refused to look at me. I sat in the echoing silence of the conference room, staring at the empty chairs. Arthur placed a hand gently on my shoulder. "You did well," he said. I looked down at my notepad. I had written only one word during the entire exchange. Discredit. I felt nothing, or rather I felt the quiet hum of a machine working as designed. The humiliation she had engineered for me was a public spectacle, loud and messy. The exposure of her conspiracy was quiet, clinical, and devastatingly precise. Humor had been their weapon of choice. The truth was mine. The deposition was the rehearsal. The trial would be the performance. And this time, I knew exactly what my role was. I was not the audience. I was not the victim. I was the evidence.